As Donald Trump's polling hits new lows, we're seeing massive international protests against Donald Trump. We're seeing him mocked in parades, like coming off of whatever the heck that was of Rubio in Munich. You have in Düsseldorf, Germany, a carnival that was taking place today where one of the main attractions was mocking Donald Trump. There were Donald Trump hitting Jesus in the face and giving Jesus a black eye float, along with Vladimir Putin floats. There was Donald Trump being a Putin bootlicker float. Of course, right outside of Munich, there was this statue of Donald Trump called the Orange Plague that everybody saw as they were walking. And rather than me describing it, let me just play for you what went down. And this is what it looks like in Düsseldorf as Donald Trump. It's a float of Donald Trump violating the Statue of Liberty while he has a stormy tattoo on his leg. Here, play this clip. More from Düsseldorf right here. Here, play this clip. Finally, I'll show you a little bit more right here. Let's play it. So the United States was featured alongside the Ayatollah, Putin, Afghanistan. They sure know how to do a carnival there in Düsseldorf and in Germany. More on Donald Trump's crashing poll numbers. The new data out this morning suggests that if there were to be a redo of the 2024 election, not only would former Vice President Kamala Harris, well, only would she win, but she'd win pretty big numbers. Here, play this clip.
Regrets of some folks had a few. What are we talking about here? Well, let's just take a look here. Okay, choice for a 2024 presidential election. The actual was Donald Trump winning by about 1.5 points. It rounds to a point. But take a look here. In a polled redo between Donald Trump and Kamala Harris in April of 2025, it was within the margin of error, right? Kamala Harris by a point. But look at where we are now, according to an NBC News Survey Monkey poll. Kamala Harris wins in a redo, asking folks, essentially, if you could redo the 2024 election, how would you vote? She wins it by, get this, 8 points, a massive shift from what we saw back in November of 2024 when Donald Trump won by 1 point. And I will note that this sample was weighted to the 2024 result in which Donald Trump won by 1 point, but yet Kamala Harris in this weighted sample, get this, she wins by 8 amongst the sample that voted for Trump by 1.
So the good news is Kamala Harris, for her, wins the 2024 election. The bad news is it's actually 2026, so it doesn't count for her. What about, though, the 2026 midterms when we're talking about Trump voters and then also Harris voters?
Okay, so you see this, and as John was laughing about, the fact is the 2024 election is good, gone, goodbye. But it has a massive impact, this voter sentiment, on what may happen later this year. Why do I say that? Because let's take a look at the vote for Congress. And this is very important, all right? 2024 Harris voters, they vote for the Democrats on average by, get this, 89 points. The Trump voters mostly stick by the Republicans, but by a significantly smaller margin, by 83 points. This means that the Democratic base that voted for Kamala Harris is sticking with those congressional Democratic candidates to a much greater degree than those Trump voters are sticking with the Republican candidates for Congress. And that is why what you're seeing on that generic congressional ballot is Democrats leaping ahead by this point by about 5 points, because at least at this point, the Trump voters are not sticking by the Republicans as much as the Harris voters are sticking by the Democrats.
Yeah, and these numbers may not look that different, but this 5 points, which is roughly what that is, that really could be hugely important come November. This is people who did vote in 2024. What about those perhaps who did not?
Okay, so part of the equation, right, is that the Harris voters are really sticking with those Democratic candidates to a more so than the Trump voters are sticking with the Republican candidates. But it's more than that. It's also people coming off of the sideline. Okay, voters' choice for election for the 2026 congressional elections. If they didn't vote in 2024, look at this. Democrats are winning that vote by a significant margin, by 16 percentage points. So you add on to that.
And you add on to that the independent voters who are overwhelmingly swinging away from Donald Trump. And the question is why? And I think I think we know the answer. But I think one of the great articles that came out recently was from Semafor by Ben Smith, host of the Mixed Signals podcast and co-founder and editor-in-chief of Semafor, how Trump's politics return to earth. They identify some of the main factors here in kind of Donald Trump's fall right now. Real videos, the ICE, Border Patrol, Gestapo videos that people are capturing of Trump terrorizing and this Border Patrol terrorizing the people in this country. The Epstein disaster, obviously, the cover-up of the Epstein files, the continued cover-up, and Donald Trump claiming he's vindicated while there are lots of people in his regime who are mentioned, and certainly doesn't seem like vindication would be putting it lightly, and the American people are horrified at what they're seeing, and rightfully so. And Trump's attempt at capturing the media really hasn't gone as planned. I mean, yeah, we see what's going on CBS. Obviously, you have Fox and other media bending the knee, but I think you have independent news also rising, and people are getting their information from places like the MeidasTouch network, like Semafor, and other places. So let's bring in Ben Smith. Ben, it's great to see you right there. I showed you what was going on in Düsseldorf, but I didn't need to show you in Düsseldorf what's going on right here in Peoria. What's happening in the United States is something astonishing. And I know you as a reporter, political observer for so many years. I mean, this is, there's definitely something going on right now, which is why you wrote the article. That is not hyperbolic, I don't think, to talk about, Trump really, descending right now, as Enton says, to new lows. What do you make about it?
Yeah, I don't think Trump is going to win the Düsseldorf mayoral election this November. But more broadly, the thing about Trump is he is this bizarre political phenomenon who seems to play by none of the sort of rules that we grew up thinking about how politics works. And when he arrived on the scene, everybody said he was going to lose, and he won. And I think, and yet at the same time, there are these other periods where he's sort of behaving exactly like any other political figure, and actually having the first year of a presidency feel like this massive sea change in the direction of the country, in which the president has absolutely reshaped everything. And then you get to the second year and that all collapses, is like the most familiar pattern in American government. And Trump's numbers are somewhat worse. I think in the polling Nate Silver has, a little worse than Biden's were at this point of time, a little worse than his own numbers were 8 years ago, which is, pretty bad, but within the norms of the second year of a president bad. But I think one of the really interesting things is how much of what we thought was happening last year kind of turns out to be wrong. I mean, I think there was this idea that we were post-truth, specifically, that kind of the combination of these hyper-partisan social media environment and AI was going to mean everybody would live in this kind of closed bubble and nothing would crack through. That, if you didn't like the reality you saw, somebody would make you a video showing a different one. I just don't think that's really happened. Like, I was worried about that, but I think particularly around the ICE stuff, what broke through was the reality of these videos, and it broke through, including to the White House, which is now pulled out of Minneapolis. But I don't think anybody thought, like the big story of 2026 is going to be like real videos on social media, which just change everybody's minds about reality. Like, I think that was in a weird way, kind of an unexpected plot twist. And that to me is actually in some ways the thing that everybody got most wrong. The idea that Trump had created this new epistemic universe. I think we often overrate the power of our politicians.
Right. Well, he was certainly trying, and
Yeah.
When we saw the real videos, whether it was Renee Nicole Good, Alex Pretty, or the countless others, it followed a repeated pattern. And it's interesting that we're recording this on the day where Tricia McLaughlin announces her resignation, or that she's departing. They claim this has been in the works since December, but who the hell really knows with them? But the pattern is Tricia McLaughlin, Kristi Noem, whoever, they come out and they say, this is a domestic terrorist. They try to bend the reality of what it is. And then that's reported as the truth. And then the video comes out, and then different angles of the video come out. And then people are like, yeah, but you just said that we're watching the video. And then they go, yeah, but that's not really what happened in the video. And then they kind of, and I think this is what you talked about in the article as well. They then had to basically, like with the Preti video, somewhat walk it back and say, well, now we're doing an investigation, and then it falls into the ether. But they've tried to bend the reality of what's happening, don't you think, at least?
I think people did think it was working. I mean, I think that's sort of the perception of that first 100 days, the flooding the zone, the shock and awe. And, that magic, whatever it was, has just totally worn off. And I think the Trump people, to some degree, persuaded themselves that they could shape reality, that they could, particularly on X, just reshape people's perceptions of what was actually happening. It reminds me so much of the Bush years. There was this famous line that, that the Bush administration gave, I believe, to like a GQ reporter, that they were, they didn't need that the power of the United States was such, the Bush administration, that they could reshape reality. They didn't need to respond to it. And I do think that the best analogy right here is for, at least in my own experience covering politics, is this just feels so much like 2006, when you had the Iraq War, which had been the great initiative of the Bush administration, the fight for freedom, was what made Bush popular and got him reelected in a certain way, had become so intensely unpopular. And you had this advisor, Donald Rumsfeld, who became seen as the kind of central figure of the administration and who resigned the day after the midterms. And I don't know if it's not really Trump's style to push people out, but I would think there's just enormous pressure on Stephen Miller right now. And I don't know if he resigns before the midterms, resigns after the midterms, sticks around. But I think that's, to me, it's sort of that moment where the president put a lot of confidence in one advisor to steer national policy in a direction that's been politically disastrous.
Right. But Bush still had conventional political figures around him who still made conventional political moves, even if they express that kind of bravado. I mean, when Trump was confronted with the fact that Howard Lutnick said he had never been to or never spoken with Epstein because he was so disgusting after one interaction, then, brought his freaking children to the island and then did a business deal with Epstein, and Trump's asked about it. Trump's like, yeah, he brought his family. He brought his kids. As far as I know, and the American people are like, yeah, that's the problem. He brought his kids to the island where the children were sex trafficked. That's the issue of the judgment here. And so, you talk about the Epstein files in your article. His handling of that has been so botched and so destructive. And every day it just feels like he's further and further. Obviously he's alienated people, who despise him, but even his own base is like, what? Like, what are you're saying you're vindicated? What are you talking about?
Yeah, no, I think the Epstein files, one of the really great political mistakes I've ever seen was Pam Bondi and Dan Bongino and Kash Patel, who I guess they sort of weren't in on the joke. Like, Trump liked to talk about the Epstein files, liked to kind of throw it as mud at his enemies. But also, of course, he knew that he'd been close friends with Jeffrey Epstein for years. By the way, no serious allegation that Trump ever committed a crime. That is not in the files. But the association with Epstein right now politically, it's like an oil spill. Like, you can't get it off you once it's on you. And I can only imagine what Trump was thinking when these trusted aides of his went and said, we're going to release all the emails. This is going to become the centerpiece of American law enforcement. We're going to divert the FBI and these U.S. attorneys from immigration cases, from everything else, to redact Epstein files. When, of course, Trump was going to be all over them. Of course, he knew that. He'd known Epstein for years. They were friendly. That was widely reported before he ran for president. It was all over the tabloids. And so just an unbelievable kind of unforced error by his team to kind of totally derail, I think, his second term by just dropping this, giant bucket of allegations basically on Trump's head. And he can't really say, I'm going to fire anybody who has a connection with Epstein, because obviously Trump had a closer relationship with Epstein than Lutnick or than anybody else here.
You mentioned there that there's, regarding the Epstein files, that there may not be anything in the files. That there certainly are lots. I think there are lots of allegations that are made against Donald Trump in the files that were never investigated by the FBI and DOJ. We see the allegations there, whether they're corroborated or uncorroborated. they were never investigated. And I think a lot of people have concern about that. But look, I think what people are recognizing.
Well, I actually just, for what it's worth, I disagree with you on that. I mean, you think the Biden Justice Department participated in a years-long cover-up of Donald Trump's crimes? I think these are this huge dump of files that were part of one of the biggest investigations in American history. And the reason nobody got indicted is because they couldn't find anybody to indict.
Well, I think that there was an active
This is me.
case.
I realize this may be a dissenting view.
No, well, look, I appreciate dissenting views, but let's, I think it's a healthy debate to have. So, one of the things that I think is important is this undisputed fact, and you could push back if you think it's true or not. Mar-a-Lago, was it a site where child sex trafficking took place? Like, true or false?
I guess I think that they're just the allegations being thrown around the Epstein files. You've just got to really root them in evidence, and I just see no reason to believe that the Biden FBI was involved in an extensive cover-up of crimes at Mar-a-Lago. That just seems unlikely to me.
Well, I think that Virginia Giuffre was somebody who was at Mar-a-Lago, who was, sex trafficked when she was underage. And there was the ongoing case and the appeals against Ghislaine. And then Donald Trump has been found civilly liable for sexual assault, right? Yeah,
I feel like you're trying to turn me into Donald Trump's lawyer here, Ben.
I'm not trying to turn you into his lawyer. I just, to me, there's a lot, no matter whether it was Biden, whether it was, Trump 1, whether it was Obama, where it was George W. Bush, I'm not trying to turn you into anything. I just think that there are a lot of...
but I think we can probably agree that, like, the people around Trump really should have known better than to unseal this particular Pandora's box, which just flew right into their own faces and just really an incredible way.
Well, I think that they have a lot of explaining to do. I don't think Lutnick's explanations are great. I don't think the fact that Steve Bannon was having all of these conversations, was great. I think that it raises a lot of serious questions. And look, I think that the American people, are looking who's in control now, who's the people saying release it. They're the ones. There's a lot of documents that haven't been released. And I think we'll leave it at there's a lot of questions that need to be answered.
Yeah. And I think there are questions that, I think partly because Trump genuinely, admittedly, publicly had this friendship with Epstein, it's just so hard for him to ever disentangle from this. It's just a sort of unsolvable political problem for him, I think.
No doubt. Everybody take a read at Ben Smith's article in Semafor. Check it out. And make sure you all check out the podcast as well. Mixed Signals. Thanks, Ben, so much for joining us.
Thank you so much.
Want to stay plugged in? Become a subscriber to our Substack at MeidasPlus.com. You'll get daily recaps from Ron Filipkowski, ad-free episodes of our podcast, and more exclusive content only available at MeidasPlus.com.